All right, we're going to call to order the regular meeting of the West Sacramento Public Financing Authority for March 11th. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Constantine, since you're here, would you lead us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so we're going to move to item 1. Before, just to welcome Crystal Manner to the board. Crystal is a member of the Economic Development and Housing Commission. She's replacing member McGowan, who's moved on to the Port Commission. So thank you for joining us. All right, so item 1 is presentation by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the authority. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Liebig's also new tonight as well.
Is that right?
I believe.
Oh, okay.
It's just so if we're welcoming people.
Yeah, he's been a member of the board for a little over a year, but we just haven't had a meeting, right?
This would be my first meeting.
All right, well, welcome both of you then. Anyone else? All right. Okay, so presentation by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the authority. I don't see anyone here, so I'm not going to go through my entire spiel, but if there's anyone here that I'm not noticing that wishes to address the board on an item that's not on the agenda, now would be the time. Seeing none, that brings us to the consent agenda, which is the rest of the agenda, items 3 and 4. Any item on consent for separate discussion or question or comment by any member of the board?
It's only the minutes on the.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. It's just number 2.
I'll move consent.
All right, it's been moved by
I'll second.
member Sandine and seconded by Mr. Ledesma. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? That carries. Okay, the regular agenda then. Item 3 is consideration of the Public Financing Authority Resolution 20-1 approving enhanced infrastructure financing district budget policies. Ms. Jacobson.
Good evening, Chair, Financing Authority members. I am Katie Jacobson, Director of Economic Development and Housing for the city. Tonight, staff is recommending that the Public Financing Authority adopt Resolution 20-1, approving budget policies for the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. The policy framework must be adopted by both the Council and the Public Financing Authority to allow for staff to make budget recommendations or request for council appropriation of EIFD funds.
Are you going to do it, or you want to tell me when?
Go to the next slide.
Wait a minute.
So by way of quick background, tax increment financing districts are simply districts which collect property tax growth. They capture and collect the city's share of that property tax growth from a base year that is established at formation. The base year property tax amounts continue to be distributed per the existing taxing formulas. Prior to 2011, the city's tax increment district was the redevelopment area, as shown in yellow. When the state dissolved redevelopment districts, taxes reverted to county distribution formulas, except for redevelopment obligations upheld by the State Department of Finance. On June 14th, 2017, the City Council adopted Resolution 17-17, which approved the infrastructure financing plan for the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District Number 1. It established fiscal year 2016-17 as the base year for purposes of calculating tax increment revenues to be committed to EIFD Number 1 beginning in fiscal year 2017-18. As you can see, the EIFD district, which is in gray, Janet, can you move it back to, yeah, the EIFD district is shown in gray. The yellow is the old redevelopment district. And as you can see, the EIFD district is roughly similar to the old redevelopment district, except the area in green, which you'll recognize as the Bridge District. The Bridge District formed its own IFD in 2014, which is IFD 1, as part of overall Bridge District financing mechanisms, which also include a CFD. Next slide. So project funding or use of EIFD funds needs to be approved by both the Public Finance Authority and the Council. So staff took the policies to the Council January 15th and incorporated Council comments into the policies that we bring before you tonight, that staff is recommending tonight. After the Public Financing Authority acts on these policies, we will return to Council again for their final action and direction. So Resolution 20-1 includes the direction to the Financing Department also to evaluate the capacity, timing, and potential of bond proceeds. Debt issuance is now possible without a district-wide vote, as a district-wide vote was in the enacting legislation originally, but it was amended later with AB 116, which now allows us to issue debt without a community-wide vote. Next slide. So as you can see by the projections which are in the staff report, the EIFD grows over time, while Measure G is not experiencing the growth until the redevelopment bond debt is fully paid. So this is just a flow chart that illustrates the flow of the former redevelopment tax increment. So the former redevelopment tax increment, which was the growth from the base year established with redevelopment, is collected by the county. The county goes ahead and pays off all the redevelopment obligations and debts that were found in conformance by the state finance department, which were found to be binding. Then the residual amount flows to the city, and then the city finance department distributes the remaining amount according to the Measure G voter initiative language, the EIFD1 formation document, and the IFD1 formation document. Next slide. So as you can see, by there's quite a list of eligible facilities that the legislation that created the enhanced infrastructure financing district mechanisms allowed for. And this is the list of all the eligible facilities that are in the legislation, which mirrors the city's formation document. So all of these same eligible facilities are in our formation document of the enhanced infrastructure district. So given that, as staff recommended with Measure G, and as we did a very detailed financing plan for the Bridge District with its IFD, staff is coming forward tonight to recommend overall that the Public Financing Authority establish policies and criteria or an envelope, and to do that with this resolution. Staff has not been requesting any appropriation from the EIFD revenues to date, pending these further actions. Next slide. So essentially, the policies start out saying that any investments being requested, appropriations being requested, or investments being recommended by staff need to be consistent with all of the other city documents, the general plan, city's master plan. They have to have a direct connection to the district, and they need to be coordinated with our master plans for parks and traffic, storm drainage, sewer, water. Everything that we're doing should be also consistent with the council strategic plan. So again, this resolution the intent is to, create these guidelines and prioritization criteria to guide staff. However, right now at this point, these policies I would consider them more to be a framework or an envelope, and we fully anticipate that with each year we will be updating the policies. We might get to much more narrow and targeted CIP plans, perhaps even recommending 5-year actual CIP plans. But at this point in time, while we're just needing to begin to initiate requests for use of these funds, we've created this criteria. As you can see, the eligible facilities, the priority from the policies that are in the resolution 20-1 really prioritize infrastructure. Infrastructure investment has been a very important and compelling investment need in the city, because when the city incorporated from the county, the condition, the deficiencies of the infrastructure, the condition of the infrastructure, the age of the infrastructure, it has always been a top priority for the city to get infrastructure rehabbed, updated, and replaced. Additionally, we've needed, as we have, council has created a strong priority of investment in creating new sustainable development districts that has designated certain areas that have been more industrial for transition into mixed-use sustainable development pattern. And so in those areas, we're going to need a lot more, a higher level of infrastructure and a much higher level of amenities and parks. Also, the criteria provide that another area of priority, which is removing barriers to sustainable development as a priority. The council has created a lot of strategy initiatives to really have focused Measure G investment in our new sustainable, dense, mixed-use neighborhoods. And this EFD criteria is intended to support, to reinforce, and to continue that. So this would include investments like parking structures that support densities that we have as a target in order to create the ridership for transit, pedestrian and bicycle amenities to meet, broader city climate action plan goals. So we do expect that more evaluation and presentations will come forward in the future that may narrow this further. One of the other areas that we are experiencing right now that is a barrier to realizing the potential of our infill areas is the fee burden. So we're currently doing a lot of analysis. We have a consultant doing some research and analysis for us. So these policies tonight that staff is recommending that you approve simply establish that measures that could reduce fee burdens to allow residential, denser residential product to go forward in the city in the future is an eligible investment, but we would not bring that forward without coming back to both the PFA and the council with very clear, identified, specific measures and mechanisms for doing that they would adopt ahead of staff ever recommending this. You can see by the next, just to give you a sense, it's just did a rough analysis and mapping to show where new investment is happening in the city. And what this demonstrates is that there's a lot of new investment. The green bars, represent all building permits over $500,000. The entire chart represents building permits over $500,000 that have been pulled in our city in the past 5 years. And you can see that the areas with the intensive new investment and development are those areas where, for the most part, fees have been reduced through a development agreement or a CFD or other mechanism. And then the red shows you where the amount of development or new investment that's happening in those areas that don't have any fee incentives in place. So the city has done a really great job of reducing uncertainty for developers, for reducing off-site costs for developers by coming in and to these areas, these sustainable districts that we've prioritized for development, and doing a lot of infrastructure work. We've been very successful in getting grants, both state and federal, and it's created this huge market demand. So in the past year, I've been more than ever received calls from new investors, from developers with proven track records that the city would be really thrilled to have develop. And it's not that it's only our fees that are causing them to walk, but it's a combination of where they're looking at the rents and prices here, which are still at a slight discount from across the river, and the cost of construction for a denser product, and they're saying, these are the main factors that are causing me to make a decision on whether or not to go forward or not. But maybe if I can get those factors within 5%, within 3%, I feel like I can value engineer and I can get the project over the finish line. However, then they get to the fee burden and it sort of tips the project. So this is one area that staff has been focused on and hopes to come forward soon with some possible solutions for.
Can I ask a question there, Katie? On that front, so when you come back So this is just a framework of kind of the budget policy that kind of gets us off the ground. And then you'll come back with more specific, kind of targeted ways that we might use this, specifically around, I know what you're getting at is the part where we might apply or use these funds towards the projects you're talking about. Will it, and this, the document, Exhibit A, the actual budget policies, articulates A through H, many situations that this would be eligible for, right? But I'm trying to figure out, because we've talked about, and it captures a lot of priorities for the council that we've articulated in the past 12 months, but what I'm not catching, and maybe it's the housing one, roads, what's wrong?
We're live on that.
And so
But I'm sorry, but it is on, huh? What it's not capturing is, not seeing right away is how do we deal, I know we've talked a lot about kind of our investments in community, strategic investments in the community or disadvantaged communities or the equity issue. And I'm trying to understand how that might overlay this.
Oh, in terms of the Measure N funds?
Yes.
That is we are beginning to analyze how we can pair these two funding mechanisms together, and to look at, layering in some strategies that get further at the inclusive issue. And we could wait and not adopt these now until we've done that. It's just that staff can't bring forward any funding requests until these policies are put in place, and so.
Well, and yeah, I'm not saying I'm holding it up. I'm just asking how we might come back and answer those questions. I don't think council has really answered sort of what that even means, and staff's trying to figure that out too. But I just want to make sure there's room here to fit that in as staff begins to create that strategy, because I think that was an important component of kind of our the council's priorities is seeking ways to leverage these funds, Measure N funds, towards and kind of an inclusive economic development component, which, because I just don't want, I was noticing on the staff report on page, these aren't page 3, I'm sorry, it is. Or just projects should be located in geographic areas with the greatest potential for return on investment. And while that's generally right, that's not, I don't want it to be, that's it, right? That we also wanted, I think that was the intent, is we would add an element there, at least from my view of, or brought about some amount of inclusive economic development for those communities that may need it, for those neighborhoods that may need it. So I know it's maybe for my colleagues, it's just a concept that council's been leveraged Measure N for, was how can we find funds to invest in neighborhoods that otherwise don't get the benefit of impact fees or may not have other mechanisms to improve a park or fix sidewalks or put in a bright area, how do you put the historic problem, how do you put power lines in the ground and all those sorts of issues that we just can't get to. Mm-hmm. That, I think some of that, I just want to make sure that may not have the greatest economic return on investment, which is sort of outlined here, but it may have other goals here. And I just want to make sure there's room to fit that in or lay that out. I know you want to get this going so we can start to apply it, but I want to reserve, I think based on that priority, I think how we reserve that.
Another factor to consider is Measure G. It allows a lot more flexibility in terms of the types of investments that we can do, for example, with jobs training programs or things like that, or that create, more mobility, more economic mobility. And so my staff was actually so happy and excited that council adopted that as a strategic objective, because they have a lot of ideas and programs that they do want to bring forward. But we're just kind of beginning to think about that. But when I was working on this, I did think about Measure G might be also, an important source of in terms of the inclusive economic development.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that, no, I'm just also want to be careful that that was a, advisory. So just as long as it fits within what,
Right.
an advisory measure that
Right.
fits within our description, which we did back 2014, or 16, whatever it was. Whenever we did that, just want to make sure we apply that lens as well. Okay, thank you.
I think that,
That's slide 9. Oh, you already did this one?
I think, oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were concluded. I did want to talk about, there's an additional use, a criteria or an eligible use described in the policies, and that is investing in private industrial facilities. So this is a new area that the city's never, to my knowledge, since I've been here, taken public funds and invested them into privately owned facilities. So at the same time, I'm aware that the city has a lot of obsolete industrial product that with some new investment could be reused for higher and better uses. And also the city has a lot of industrial areas like Pioneer Bluff or west of Washington District that it has designated to transition to higher, mixed use development. So I just wanted to point out that, we went ahead, at one point I thought about not including them in this existing criteria. And I think certainly staff will need to come back and give more narrow and defined program if it were ever to recommend this type of investment. But given the need to transition these areas and all of the obsolete stock, which is adjacent to or in transitioning areas, I went ahead and recommended that it be included in the criteria. But I tried to narrow it as much as possible in terms that it has to be in these designated areas that are transitioning. It needs to, hit a target industry that we're trying to attract. It needs to possibly be prioritized for doing actually public improvements, but maybe it's frontage, streets, parks, beautification measures that relate to the reuse of an industrial structure. And then I think a good use would be repair and rehab to update and bring an industrial structure up to reuse standards for a better commercial use. So on that basis, I'm recommending that criteria be included. Again, staff would, if requesting to use it for that, would be bringing forth something very specific. And that concludes my presentation.
All right, thanks, Katie. Just for some opening framing of this, I mean, this is a critical document because we typically don't, either at the authority or at the council, take a look at the entire budget and all of the projects in a year, for example, and then rank and prioritize them. Because many of these proposals and things happen on a flow basis, right, all year round. If it weren't that way, we could do that. I mean, the most effective way for us to budget is say, what are all the needs that we have and what are the resources that we have? Now let's figure out from a policy perspective, which ones we should fund first. That's how we would do, our road rehabilitation plans or anything else. We can't do that here because a project walks in the door next week or something else happens. So we need to provide ourselves a different framework. But the budget policies then are intended to guide, to tell staff this is what is appropriate to bring forward. But they only work to the extent that they also tell us things that don't come forward or have low priority. And so I think I want to keep honing these because I'm not sure that there are too many things I could imagine that wouldn't fall in this set of criteria that we've been asked for. And so, the ones that I've been opposed to from the beginning, which we don't do, which is developer comes in and says, I'm building an office building in the Bridge District, and it's 2 stories tall and whatever, and I really would like a subsidy of $1 million, and we're like, no, we don't do that. But that would be permitted in G, because it's a private project that meets a commercial development goal that's in one of our land use plans. But that's like an extraordinarily low bar. That's like, anything that's in any economic development plan or a land use plan, which includes the general plan, so virtually everything is in there. So to me, that one is very problematic in the sense that it's just way too expansive in terms of providing real guidance, because it's not useful to say what we're including if it's everything. So I think that this is a really good framework, and it's raised all the pieces. But I do think that's one that I'd like to see either out or radically, some radical surgery done to it to make it much more specific about what it is that we're talking about. The second sort of overarching piece is that in A, we talk about investments have to demonstrate that they will be offset by the tax increment growth. I assume that means fully offsets, but even if it does mean fully offsets, if the private development projects that are fully private sector projects all come in at the amount of the tax increment that they're generating, there isn't going to be any resources for C and D and E and any of these others. And so that, to me, that's a low test. So in A, I think given what emerged from the council's strategic planning session around our regional housing needs allocation expectation that we're to produce 10,000 additional housing units, of which I forget how many, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 are to be affordable to residents with low or very low incomes. That's an incredibly ambitious stretch goal. But to me, these projects need to be, in A, these are projects that need to be getting us to those goals. And so coming in at half the density that's in the Washington specific plan, for example, for a project, to me does not satisfy, it shouldn't be a high priority for us to provide a subsidy. If it's not doing the project that we need and that we have been assigned in the regional allocation process or in the sustainable community strategy, I'm not convinced that should be a high priority. I'm not saying it should necessarily be ineligible, but it's not a priority. We should be using our subsidies to make sure that folks are building to our plans, and we can't handle too many 50% of density projects from either an infrastructure financing perspective, a transit and mobility perspective, or from a compliance perspective around the climate change rules and the regional housing needs allocation. So I would definitely tighten this one up to be targeted around the density numbers and figures that are in the general plan or a specific plan. As a floor with respect to these kinds of projects, and then secondarily, that the projects need to generate tax increment that is beyond normal growth, right? So we can project using basic statistical techniques what would likely happen with a piece of property or piece of property's value just based on background property tax assessment growth in the city, right? Every parcel. Most parcels are experiencing some growth, even if nothing happens to them. And so really what we're interested is in investments that produce EIFD revenue that is beyond that. Because if we were just generating that revenue that is natural background, we would be better off as a community just letting that money go in the general fund. I mean, we create the EIFD in order to accelerate and deepen the return on investment, and there is no return on investment if it's just what we would have earned on the natural from an empty parcel on West Capitol Avenue. So the test here, I think, needs to be significantly stronger. One, because of the projects need to generate net that's going to go into some of the public serving projects, into some of the neighborhoods that don't have access to development and other things that we've talked about, but also because it needs to be beyond the sort of the natural background growth that would be occurring for it to make sense. So I would probably do a lot of surgery to A in order to accomplish some of those objectives. And so we don't really also mention affordable until we get to 4, but affordability. Affordability, it seems to me like it belongs in this set of criteria and priorities around sustainable development in some way, even as a priority, because if we have two otherwise equivalent investments that we're considering, and one includes some amount of affordable housing in it, then I think we would all agree that that's the one that we would pick, all else being equal. And that's exactly the sort of decision criteria that belongs in a budget policy like this. I'm not saying it should say all else being equal, we pick that one, but affordability should be reflected somewhere in our expressed priorities about how we're going to allocate scarce EIFD resources. And that partly gets to the inclusive economic development question that I'm glad Mr. Ledesma brought up so firmly, because Measure G and Measure N are important resources and they're important tools, but they were not adopted by the council or by the voters as a ceiling on our investments. And that's not the money that's for inclusive economic development and everything else is not. Those are just basically have said this, no matter what we're spending, this Measure N, this allocation is for inclusive economic development, but there's no reason why all of the money can't be related in some way to inclusive economic development. And so I wouldn't silo that objective that the council's expressed in the strategic plan, either just in 4 or defer it as part of just Measure N and Measure G. It should be reflected somewhere as a policy here.
So can I ask for clarity? So you're talking about covenant-restricted housing?
No, not necessarily,
You're just
no.
saying, okay,
Yeah.
so that's what this is intended to, number 4 is just intended to refer to covenant-restricted housing. I think it's a great idea to add more affordable just by design, by market factors into the sustainable.
Somewhere in the number 2.
Right,
yeah.
more the diversity of housing choice.
Right, if somebody's got covenanted affordable housing units in number 2, that's great, but that's not, but it's not, I mean, that's not going to be we've never determined our entire strategy around inclusive economic development. It's all going to be, it's covenanted affordable housing. On F, on the mobility side of the equation, invest in supporting private projects that have the potential to substantially enhance transit ridership counts. I think we should hold ourselves to a more validated standard, like perhaps using projects that according to the SACOG model, or some standard accomplish this. In the same way that the RENA stuff in A is useful for having like numbers and frameworks, standards that we're using, so that we're not looking at every project and saying, well, yeah, it advances economic development, or right, that generality of terms, I think, diminishes the utility of the framework. So I think that's one where we have usable traffic and development models that don't require us to go commission and pay for a traffic study, that we could start to use in order to set a validated, verifiable standard in this space. Then the only other comment I want to make, I think, was on in one. Actually, no. Yeah, so I guess somewhat similarly, in D and E, where we say that we're prioritizing funding for projects that will enhance the city's tax base, and then in E, provide funding as a component of financing master plans with identified economic development benefits. I think we're going to need to get much more detailed than that, because that is virtually everything. There are very few project, especially since we're thinking about master plan project financing as a way to reduce impact fees, that won't have some identified economic development benefit. So it won't be a useful filter. Those two terms aren't particularly useful, because virtually everything is going to accomplish that. The city's tax base piece, I've raised this once before, I think, is that on the warehousing projects and some of the projects where there are no longer significant jobs attached to them because of automation or other factors. I continue to want to get at that issue, that if a piece of property, yes, its property tax value is going to go up, because once you build a structure, there's going to be an increase in assessed valuation. But compared to what? right? So if we provide a subsidy in order to accomplish that project, and we get a small amount of tax increment from that assessed valuation, we haven't added any jobs. We've taken that piece of property off the market to be something else that might provide jobs and a property tax bump. I'm not sure I want to spend, if I had only $1 to spend, I'm not sure that's where I would go on projects where we're not receiving jobs benefits or sales tax benefits or some other revenue other than the sort of baseline property tax revenue that we would get from solely the cost, the value of the construction itself.
But what about measuring the value that you've transitioned you're transitioning an industrial obsolete building and now you're bringing in a higher, better use, and then it's serving your goal of transitioning that neighborhood? I guess that's
Yeah,
what I
so-
was trying to.
So like, you mean like in Pioneer Bluffs as an example?
Right.
Yeah, no, but I guess I'm talking more like Riverside Center, River Point, in that zone where, which is where we've seen the most of the automation and that sort of thing occur. And it's not, they're not bad projects. It's not like, I'm not proposing to ban them. But in terms of if we're going to subsidize them and they're not generating either sales taxes or jobs, then to me, that's not a good investment of our very limited EIFD funds in terms of a subsidy for that purpose. The deindustrialization objective is a different objective altogether, and that's a real one. So I'm supportive of that, of the language that you've crafted in that space. But I think in the other parts of the city, that just a regular old, now robotically operated 7-employee, 400,000 square foot building is not necessarily, would not necessarily, for me at least, be on the top 10 list of where we should put our EFD investments. All right, does spark anybody's creative juices? Any other questions or comments?
Well, I did want to clarify, because I said to remind myself, in the Climate Commission, back to your point on a modal shift of how we reduce VMT, and the Climate Commission, it does recommend 15% reduction, so that might be a target we think about.
Yeah. You're talking about in D or EF?
F, I'm sorry.
Because the same thing could be true in D, but yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. That's a good point. Other questions or comments?
I have thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Liebig?
Hi, Katie. I'm very interested in 2A, and it's nice to see policies intended to offset market factors that are currently depressing investment, particularly in key areas like Washington, Pioneer Bluff, those urban transit hubs. If we set this as a policy and becomes a blanket policy for larger areas, and given that this is a very limited fund at this point, are we able to offset the fees sufficiently to compete with some of our neighbors using existing funds?
Initial analysis we're tackling it from all directions, and so, again, with 2A, the intention is just to say this is we're creating this eligibility of this, but we understand that council and the PFA will expect very clear criteria and very specific program about, because it would have to be within certain districts, specified districts, so that you're not triggering prevailing wage. And those fee funds either have to be backfilled, and so that's a mechanism where you're backfilling those fee funds with this EIFD revenue in some kind of systematic way so that those funds are made whole. Perhaps it's time limited. Perhaps there's just other percentage reductions that we do for a very limited period of time. If there's projects that are stalled, just to say, okay, if fees are reduced, by 50% in the next year, are you going to move forward? And that would sort of suss out, some of these developers to find out if they're really ready to move forward, and this is the only thing. So this is, again, I clearly understand that this is a new area and that staff will need to have a lot more identified, clear, specific criteria before it goes forward, and also review and consider the different options that there might be to accomplish this objective.
I think you're hitting the exact points I was interested in if we wanted to offset fees by, say, 50%. What are we looking at for that? So, and especially since we need to cover blanket areas in order to not trigger prevailing wages. And maybe we could shrink it by types of housing.
Right.
Set density requirements,
Right.
things like
Right.
that. I'm definitely interested in how we can get those fees down, as I see that major factor for our current investment.
Yeah, I worry, especially in a 10,000 housing unit goal that we've been given, that we accept, when we open the door to impact fee offsets, it's a bottomless, functionally a bottomless pit, for which we don't have anywhere near the resources in the EIFD. And even if we said, you know what, and we're not going to fund a single sidewalk or anything in a disadvantaged neighborhood, we're going to do nothing but that, we still would not have anywhere near enough. And so laying out those criteria, those limiting factors, to me, as like constrained as possible at the outset, because it's way easier to relax it later than it is to tighten it later, is going to be really important. Because we're all going to get, you know, when I first came on council a long time ago, I mean, redevelopment was still a little fast and loose and a little cowboy, and just the number of developers that came, and of course, everyone's got a pro forma, like I could just go if you would just do this thing, and yeah, I know, and then you don't build anyway, or everyone else is that too, and even if that's not enough of a test, because that's everyone. And everyone, and a couple of projects in, and everyone knows, okay, West Sac is now just like Sacramento, and you just walk in and you expect that you're going to get, you know, you got a project of this size, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to get $1 million subsidy or whatever. You know, the Sacramento's has, you know that, you build that into your true pro forma. So we can't get to that space. So like being as precise as possible in advance, as opposed to expecting that you and the city manager and the PFA director will come back and after the fact and say, here's the justification. Both you and we will be under way too much pressure to subsidize projects, and we'll run out of money real fast. So I think these notions around place and type of project and financial benefit and we need to really get those in. I'd like to get those in before we see a single one of these projects that's on impact fees, because that's good. That first barn door opening, which needs to happen, is gonna say a lot about what our intentions are. And I'd like to actually also test the proposition, because I'm not so convinced, frankly, that impact fees are as much, everyone complains about them everywhere across the entire region and the entire state. And at least the research I've seen doesn't show a very strong statistical relationship, all else being held equal, between actual construction and impact fee rates, accounting for coast versus non-coast and all the other factors. So it's not that it's not something. But with many of these projects, it's the financing that's been endangered, either because of exogenous factors or the market or rents or other issues. And the a couple $1,000 per unit impact fee is just a reward if you're able to get the credit, but it's not as much of a driver. So, but I could, I'm not saying I'm right, that's correct, but it's a testable proposition.
Right. I mean, our fees are about twice what they are in our competitive market set for our sustainable districts. And so, and our rents and prices are about 10% lower. So that's the data that will come forward on the topic.
Yeah, but if the state is going to somehow deliver the number of units that it intends to deliver, that gap is going to have to get closed in a much different way. I mean, us trying to buy our way out of lower property, lower rents, the city cannot, or the PFA cannot do that. We cannot make uneconomic projects economic on a sustained basis. Only once in a while at the margin, trying to nudge the market, not trying to help each project. And so that I think that's referenced in the document, but I think it's important as a philosophical and policy perspective, is that we're looking for we're looking to do if we do this, we're doing it for the first one or two projects of their type in their place in order to reset the market, but we're not going to then do it for the next 6 once rents in the market are set. That we need to be very clear about that. That for the followers, they're not likely to get the same treatment as the pioneers.
And that was, I think, I was thinking kind of along those lines. I was trying to figure out, because there's so many ways in which to use the funding, and thinking about what's been happening in the stock market the last couple of weeks, I was wondering if there was a way to trigger kind of, I know this is a policy on the use, but a governor of some kind, if all the funding was going one way in one place, is there a way to go, whoa, like we don't, that's not the intention of this. So I didn't know if there was a way to think about figuring out how to, and maybe it's just the reporting back to the council and this body, but I was just trying to figure out, okay, no, we didn't, there are all these ways, and we really weren't thinking that it was only going to go into sidewalks, or, do you know?
Right.
Right, so some way to add that layer on.
And I'm sorry.
There is, so every budget request that comes forward, my understanding of this process is that it does have to come to the PFA, and then it goes to council, so the annual appropriations process is will give you snapshots in time to see where the funds are, how they're being used and leveraged. So there is that opportunity that you begin to gauge if too much funding is being directed in one area that you don't want to approve.
We sort of had that notion around Measure E, right? Measure E, we contemplated that we would look at it as a portfolio of investments we would make on trails or on how we were able to leverage those monies and how much we would get back in return from grant funding that it spurred. So I kind of view this, I think it's a good point for Board Member Sandine, was around, when this comes back, how were they used? How were we able to leverage them? How were we to get towards the goals we have or whatever? And I think that would be an important marker about the PFA's ability to kind of be really effective in its use of an application of this. So I think it's a really good point.
Any other comments?
So I guess there's a process question because there's been a lot of feedback on this. And this, so do we feel the need to revise and come back for an approval at this point? I mean, I'm trying to.
That's what I'm hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to get this righter. I mean, there's no righter. I mean, it's not like it's not close to ready, but I do think we need to get one more iteration. And then after that, we keep perfect it as we go along, but I do think getting some of these.
I agree.
In here. Plus, we have a whole year of meetings to make up for. That's all right. Okay. All right. Okay, thanks, Katie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.
All right, the next item is confirmation and approval of the AB 116 record requirements applicable to the IFD plan of the City of West Sacramento, IFD number EFD 1.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Satwan Takar, Finance Manager, Administrative Services Department. With the passage of AB 116, it amended several sections of the EIFD law. Specifically, it removed the 55% voting threshold previously required for an EIFD bond issuance for capital facilities. Secondly, it introduces 2 additional public hearings and an additional public meeting of the PFA as part of the formation process for any new EIFD. And it also introduces an annual reporting and audit requirement. As part of the EIFD plan, the PFA is required to review the plan annually and make any amendments as they deem necessary. The PFA should also adopt an annual report on or before June 30th of each year, after holding a public hearing. Part of the report is financial related. It would disseminate the tax increment received and any expenditures made out of the EIFD funds, but also it'd be more of a compliance and performance related report as well. It would measure performance progress on projects that are undertaken by the EIFD, any milestones that are set out and achieved, and also any assessments on the status of the projects, the EIFD plan, the budget and policies. Those are the main points that have been amended by AB 116 at this time. In the recommended action, you have items 1, 2, and 3. Item 2 should be removed as that does not apply to the existing EIFD. It would only apply to new EIFDs that would be established With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, and the city was at least one of the sponsors, supporters of AB 116, so these are not draconian requirements from, that have been imposed on us, but they were our request.
So just by way of maybe curiosity, but, so we're required, I think we've always been required to have some sort of audit around the authority, have we? Is this the new,
This is a new requirement.
so with the funding of that, just is, they kind of have the audit going forward as part of the authority's regular budgeting process now?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. I'll make the motion, make a motion to approve the recommended action.
Of number 1 and number 3?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
So just for clarification, you're removing item number 2 under the action?
Is that
what you
right?
said?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. All right, report of the executive director.
He's acting today.
Here.
He's not here, he's absent.
No comments.
Are you the designee, Roberta?
I think we're sharing it, but I don't believe there are any comments.
Okay. I think you might want us to know there's legislation that's been introduced that that makes non-trivial changes to the EIFD law as well. So through the city is will be taking that issue up, but it would make it more challenging. I think we've expected this for a while, that as EIFDs became more popular, and by more popular I mean a few cities, that legislators or other groups would want to load it up with other requirements. So that is pending. California Forward is sponsoring a bill in this space, and I think they see EIFDs as a quick and easy way to implement some of their policy objectives. But I think our intention at the city, at least, is to try to communicate that maybe they want to create a new mechanism, some sort of financing mechanism, and not mess with a good thing. So just FYI. All right, report on Public Financing Authority actions. Katie keeps looking like somebody's going to walk in. No report?
We've had no actions.
All right, then future agenda item requests, we don't have any of those either. So is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that the meeting be adjourned. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.